Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. The May 20, 2008 special joint meeting of the City Council and Redevelopment Agency is called to order. This meeting has been properly noticed and posted in compliance with the open meeting law. These proceedings are being video recorded as well as presented live on KCLV, Cable Channel 2, and are closed captioned for our hearing impaired viewers. The council meeting, as well as all other KCLV programming, can be viewed on the internet at www.kclv.tv. The proceedings will be rebroadcast on KCLV Channel 2 and the web on Thursday at 5 a.m., Saturday at 2 p.m., Monday at 10 p.m., and Tuesday at 3 p.m. As we all know, this building is protected by a state-of-the-art fire detection and suppression sprinkler system, so should the alarms go off, please go outside through the exits, assemble on the Las Vegas Boulevard side, and when everything is safe, we'll tell you to come back into the building. As I say, we just make this announcement as a matter of routine at this point in time. I have no reason to believe that we'll ever have to engage in that kind of exercise. Before we move on our agenda, please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay. Item number 4 is a report and possible action on the Performance Plus strategic planning process. Ms. Fretwell? Dr. Selby.
Okay. Let me say a few introductory comments, if I
Please.
may, Mayor. Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. Today's budget hearing is your final action on the budget that will be submitted to the state. Throughout the state, cities today are having these hearings that are set in statute that they be held this day. You'll hear both the City of Las Vegas and the Redevelopment Agency budget presentations. We're going to approach this with 3 topics. First, I'll talk to you a little bit about where we're at with the fundamental review that was requested during the March City Council budget workshop. And then Ms. Fretwell will speak to you about Performance Plus. And finally, Director Mark Vincent will speak to you about the budget and the changes that have been made since the budget workshop. The fundamental review is outgrowth of what the council asked for in March 2008 when we had our budget workshop and we discussed the challenges we were facing with revenues. At that point, the council directed myself and our finance director to conduct a review of all cities' programs and operations with the goal of reducing costs to meet our decreasing revenue streams that we expect to see over the next several years. And specifically, the council's direction was to come up with a plan to streamline our operations so that we can meet the budget forecast for the year 2010. To quote just from the meeting, the direction we received is that the goal of our efforts should be to give the City Council a prioritized or ranked list of recommended adjustments, reductions, transfers, or terminations of programs and services that are neither substantially tied to the Council's key priorities nor are fundamental operating functions. Such a list should identify performance metrics where possible to indicate the value of the service or program, as well as its labor and non-labor cost components and any self-supporting revenue, with the aggregate net savings to equal or exceed the forecast FY 2010 budget deficit. Of course, we routinely, day in and day out, look for opportunities for efficiency and cost savings, and you'll hear about some of those that have come directly from our Performance Plus initiative. But it's a progressive and needed vision on the part of the council to look out and look at everything that we're doing so that we can meet our revenues in the future. The reason I think this is important and it is a good step to take is that we're monitoring activities and challenges that cities all over the country are facing during the recession, during the downturn in revenues. And we're seeing cities that haven't anticipated this downturn and haven't managed it properly, having to do some pretty dramatic and drastic things to curtail their expenditures. We know, for example, the city of Vallejo, California, which we've been monitoring, has actually declared bankruptcy. They could not balance their budget. Other cities have cut hundreds of workers from their workforce. Some cities have closed critical public safety facilities. So we don't want to get there, and I think this fundamental review process is a proactive action on the part of the city to allow us to make adjustments so that we don't end up having to make those very radical decisions at the 11th hour. The review will identify activities that, as I said, are no longer aligned with the council's priorities. They're no longer serving their original intended purpose. They're discretionary kinds of activities. They might already be poorly staffed or poorly resourced due to our budget cutbacks to where they're reaching a point where they're not very effective anymore. For critical services, we're going to assess the opportunities to reduce operational costs, to enhance revenues, and improve service efficiencies. And critical services will be items that really aren't on the block to be considered for termination or major modification, but more a look at those from the standpoint of efficiency. Over the years, the city has built an organization that's really become focused on customer service. As we've had the money, we've expanded programs, we've expanded services, we've enhanced our efforts to serve the community. We've tackled a backlog of major infrastructure projects, from recreational facilities to critical infrastructure and public safety facilities. The council's recognized, too, that we can't continue to do that. With the downturn in revenues that we're facing, we've got to slow down what we're doing and streamline our operations to make it through this downturn in revenues. And while we go through this process, we want to maintain our services as best we can, especially those that are deemed to be critical. We want to maintain our financial solvency. That's a key issue for us, so that our bond rating remains good. And we want to continue to preserve our workforce and build the needed infrastructure that the city will need as we make our way through this downturn and back into a recovery mode. To carry out this review for a city the size of Las Vegas requires somebody that knows the city, that knows the departments, that's been in the trenches and has worked their way through the organization and can really give a good assessment of what we do, how we do it, and probe in all of the little corners of our operations to get answers to a lot of important questions. The person that I picked to do this, I think, is very capable of that, Dr. Barbara Jackson from the Department of Leisure Services. She's been at the city for many years, has become very familiar with a lot of city departments and a lot of city functions, and I believe has the analytical ability to take this on. She will be reporting directly to me effective May 22nd, and she'll be relieved of her duties as director of the Department of Leisure Services. Billy Bastian will become acting director for that department, and she'll continue this effort until we conclude with a report to the council on October 1st. We are also looking at a possible outside consultant to help us with this effort, somebody that has experience in looking at organizations from the standpoint of streamlining and looking for waste and inefficiency, somebody that can give us an unbiased assessment of what we might be able to do here, and somebody that also can give us some ideas maybe from what other local governments have implemented to save themselves money as they've gone through downturns.
Mayor Goodman, Mayor. Well, let Dr. Selby finish his presentation, and then we'll open it up.
Okay. I'm almost finished. I'll just give you a quick update where we're at right now. We've cataloged all the past assessments that have been conducted by the city, and there have been a number of them where we've hired outside consultants to come in, prepare reports, and look at city operations. We want to review all of those for recommendations that might have been made that never were implemented to see if they're appropriate for consideration at this time. We've also assembled a preliminary list of 16 service areas. They're not necessarily aligned by department, but more by service function, and listed all the activities we conduct under those. That list now will go to the directors for review to make sure it's a comprehensive list of everything that we do, and then we'll use that as kind of our list of things to work through as we go through this. These are areas, again, that we're going to look at for possible efficiency savings, possible opportunities for new revenue or improved revenue collection. And then we're going to look at the possible negative consequences of, if we have something on a short list that says maybe we can do without this, we'll give you a list of the possible consequences of that, including impacts to staff. And throughout this process, we want to do is brief the council periodically in your regular briefings so you know where we're at and we can get your input and guidance as we move forward so that come October 1st, you're not surprised by what you see, that we'll have kind of developed this whole process with your input all along the way. And then a couple additional things. The council directed that I have some conversations with my fellow managers, and I have done that with County Manager Valentine and City Manager Gregory Rose in North Las Vegas about the topic of consolidation or merger of governments. We are challenged as managers to talk about the wholesale consolidation of government. That seems to be something that we feel needs to have some level of agreement among the elected officials in each body. Nevertheless, we have agreed to work on looking at maybe the possibility of consolidating certain activities that we do within our governments. So what we're going to do is put together a list of candidate things that might be merged and then look at the considerations that need to be weighed to find out whether such a merger or a consolidation or a service agreement is practical or even feasible, and whether it really has a long-term cost benefit to the city. And I'll just throw out one example. Might be that perhaps the county could contract with the city for our city marshals to patrol their parks. And that's just an example that has had no assessment, no measure of whether it's a valid consideration or not, but an example of how we might relieve the county of one of their challenges, and it might serve both of us through improved operational costs. And then finally, because 75% of our operating cost is labor, we are looking at our labor costs. And we want to do that through a classification and compensation study of our workforce. This is something we've talked to you about in briefings that would require an outside consultant to give us a unbiased comparison of our salaries and benefits and job classifications for the city of Las Vegas compared to other cities of our size and our economic status. And I think it's important that we pick comparable cities and try to do our best to determine whether we are properly compensating our city employees. And of course, any changes that might be recommended from such a study would have to be implemented through our collective bargaining process. So in summary, we're in the early stages of this fundamental review process. The bulk of the work is still ahead of us, and it's my goal to deliver you a comprehensive, unbiased examination of our operations so that when we come back to the council, you can make an informed policy decision as to where we should go in the future.
Thank you very much. Councilman Wilson.
Thank you, Mayor Goodman. I just wanted to make a comment on the idea of an outside consultant to aid in this review. I think Dr. Jackson is an excellent person to head up this review, but I think it's probably prudent, at least in my opinion, assuming this consultant isn't too expensive, to have somebody from the outside, because I think we need a fresh look, if you will, with all due respect to our own staff. I think we need somebody who has an expertise in doing this to look at us from the outside in. So assuming it's not too costly, I'm all in favor of that consultant. Are there those types of consultants who have done these types of jobs for other cities?
There are, and there are a few that we've actually used ourselves or have been used by other local governments that we're looking at right now.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Mayor?
Yes, Councilman.
I just wanted to add along with what Councilman Wolf was saying, that I think it's a good idea to have an outside consultant, too, if the expense isn't too great. But my understanding would be is the outside consultant and Dr. Jackson would come directly under you.
Yes.
In other words, there would be no hierarchy between the two. It would be reporting to you.
Right.
Okay, thank you.
All right, anybody else? Well, Dr. Selby?
Yes.
Did you want to be heard? Yes, sir.
Thank you, Mayor. Dr. Selby, you indicated somewhere in the quote as far as the mission of the 6 months, I think you used the term fundamental operating functions. have that quote or was that off the top of
Fundamental
your head?
review, I used that, although that wasn't the term the council used. And then critical operations.
Was it, the reference was to evaluate, or part of your task, to identify some fundamental or critical operating functions. And that struck me because I'm not sure, we certainly have our strategic plan and our priorities, but I'm not sure this council has ever had the dialogue as far as what we consider fundamental or critical core services of City Hall. And I would just, perhaps in the near future, a briefing, identify those as we're going to study over the next 4 or 5 months. So at least we're aligned as a council and the task before you. What I wouldn't want is, if this council feels public safety is a priority that will always be a priority, and yet someone else is going off on a fundamental review in a separate direction. I think we have to make sure that we're on the same page coming out of the gates. Because you mentioned adjustments, reductions, transfers, terminations, streamline. So I would like, perhaps as early as next week during your manager's briefing, the ability to just kind of see on paper what you've talked about in a little more detail. Also, I think, as has been mentioned, is I think what's being asked of you, Dr. Jackson, the departments, an outside consultant, I think it's the most important thing, at least in my tenure, that this council has asked you to do. And I'm very serious when I say that. I don't think this can be taken lightly. Certainly the things that you and your leadership and your directors have done over the past 5 or 6 years, with some change initiatives, with some efficiency programs that have been put in place, have been outstanding. And I think they've positioned ourselves as a city not to be like some of those cities you've mentioned in bankruptcy or near bankruptcy that we have come through. Mark Vincent has stated we've done some things in the past that better positioned ourselves for this downturn. Our bond rating has never been higher. So those incremental successes have been fantastic. Mr. Houchins brought out the chart 6 or 7 years ago, the famous 2013 when the revenue and the cost crossed. I think that this downturn has accelerated that. So what we have is an opportunity here, from my perspective, to make some dramatic change. Not the incremental that we've been successful, but make some dramatic policy decisions to change the way we look at how we do business, actually how we operate, and as importantly, what services or your critical functions should we remain committed to, and truly identify some that we need to move away from. Terminated, transferred, reduced, whatever. So I feel very strongly that this task that's been given you, and Dr. Jackson, and the entire senior management team, cannot be understated and should not be taken lightly. And there's so many components of that. I'm looking forward to it, and I would ask that you keep us briefed as frequently as possible, and certainly continue to seek the input from the council.
Okay.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Thank you. Anybody else? Dr. Selby, I think time is of the essence on this as well. And we set a very ambitious date with that October 1st reporting date. The buck, and I say this most respectfully, stops with you, of course, as far as getting back to us with a meaningful report. And I have to say, I'm a little concerned because of Dr. Jackson's personal life and the illness of her husband, that she may not be the right person to assume this task solely because of her other responsibilities. If it gets to that point, and you feel that way, then I think you're going to have to make an adjustment. You'll have to feel comfortable that she is able to perform, because this is, as the councilman says, probably one of the more vital exercises that we've engaged in as a council.
Yeah.
And of course, when I say that, it's with all good wishes and Godspeed to her husband's speedy recovery. That's implicit in my statement, but we know that sometimes our family responsibilities could get in the way of our commitment to the city.
Yep. I understand. I think Dr. Jackson will do a great job, but as you say, family comes first, and I'm ready to
Okay.
adjust if we need to.
Very good. All right, thank you.
Okay. Let me introduce Betsy Fretwell, and she'll talk to you about Performance Plus, which is something we started before the budget downturn, but is now paying great dividends and literally saving us hundreds of thousands of dollars. So, Betsy?
Thank you.
Good afternoon, Mayor and members of the council. I plan on giving you just a quick update. As you recall, back in December, when we were at one of your strategic planning retreats, we went over in a very high level our process of how we were rolling out Performance Plus and how we felt it would help you make informed decisions about various operational changes that may be necessary over time. And I believe that the data and the information that we're gathering through the Performance Plus process will be critically helpful in this fundamental review. Now, we may not be done, and we're not, and I'll talk through that a little bit, but we're well on our way and have received a tremendous amount of information and feedback, and I think you'll see as we go along changes in the way we do business that are really reaping huge benefits to the taxpayer. So what I would like to do is just kind of remind you what some of the goals were when we set about implementing Performance Plus. And I talked with you about this in the last budget hearing. One, we want to make sure that when we bring a budget package to you for your consideration, that budget package aligns with your priorities and what you've said are the highest and most important things that we need to be doing with those precious taxpayer dollars. It also very clearly identifies what the citizens can expect, what outcome, whether it's turnaround times on certain service deliveries or any number of service delivery standards that you expect so that we can back into meeting those citizen demands. It also combines our strategic planning and budgeting efforts. As you know, we had different separate processes that we worked to integrate. This system integrates both of those efforts. It's collaborative. We can't be successful in just one department. Every department has to participate. And as I'll mention later, there also has to be kind of an umbrella approach to all of this so that things that cut across departmental lines are adequately addressed. It also helps keep staff focused on what's critically important in day-to-day decision-making, which seems intuitive, but it really is important to reinforce with these kind of decision-making systems so that you're focused on the results as you go through everyday decision-making processes. And it also helps us identify gaps and areas in need of improvement. So basically how this works is this is an accountability system. It's a transparency system and it's an accountability system. And it focuses in on performance management. So not unlike any other process, you focus in on your planning. What are we trying to achieve? Your implementation strategies, your budget, things of that nature that indicate how we're going to get there. We measure how well we're doing as we go along. We make sure we share that message with everybody who's involved or is impacted by those decisions. And then we evaluate, well, how well did that work? And what can we change to make it a little bit better? You may remember we started with your 8 priorities back in 2005. Actually, we started with 7 priorities about 3 years prior to that. So we've got a lot of history focusing in on strategic issues at the city council level and the senior management level. In 2006, we put together key performance indicators for each of those 8 priority areas, identified strategic goals, and also tried performance budgeting in several pilot departments. We realized very quickly that piloting this process was not going to work. It was too complicated and it was too integrated with the budget cycle. We needed to have a comprehensive approach. So we rolled out Performance Plus, and the first time you all officially really heard about it was last spring. And we've made significant progress. You may remember that I indicated to you that we thought it would be a 3-year implementation cycle. We're moving very quickly through those 3 years. The first phase, we implemented 6 departmental strategic business plans. Phase 2, and we're just wrapping this up now, we completed an additional 8 departmental strategic business plans. We're working now to integrate them into performance budgeting as a result of the development of those strategic business plans. We have 4 departments left. They will begin their process this summer, well, actually in the next month or 2, and hopefully we'll wrap up by early fall. So we're hoping that by the 2010 budget, we will have all the departmental plans aligned to your priorities. They will all have budgets related to every program, and Councilman Brown, to every service that we provide within those programs and within those lines of business. We will have that level of data. And you've been hearing about pieces of it, whether it's child care licensing from Mark or some other discussions that a couple of the department heads are going to help me with here in a couple of minutes. There are some significant improvements that we're seeing already that we're not waiting on a fundamental review to do, because they're smart to do now, and we're making those adjustments as we go along with your concurrence through our briefings and by communicating the outcomes we anticipate as a result of identifying these areas of improvement now. So just to kind of give you an overview, basically we've had over 600 employees participate in the Performance Plus methodology, meaning they've gone through some training, some level of training. They've actively participated in plan development, or they're actively participating in performance measurement or budget development and alignment to those plans. We have 14 departments that have completed their plans. We've done that in a year. That is an enormous amount of effort, and all of the department heads who have gone through this and their key staff really deserve to be applauded, because without their complete dedication to getting those plans done, we wouldn't be able to say that to you today. In fact, last year I told you we'd have 6 done, and we have 14. So I'm really proud of that. And we are really working on a marketing and communication plan to get to all the rest of the employees with what this is all about, and to share the mission of Performance Plus and how it can help them do their job better and make their job more rewarding to them and to the citizens that they serve every day. Basically, as we go through the Performance Plus process, each department identifies the key issues that they're facing from their subject matter expertise, their citizen feedback, their customer focus. What are those issues? They also create useful and meaningful strategic measures, things that the managers are actually going to look at, things that they will make decisions by using. I know that sounds intuitive, but when you write things down and you articulate them and there's buy-in with all of your key leaders in your department, you really make significant, conscious progress as you move through this model. And the measures are based on logic. How useful are they? And it's an iterative process. We continue to refine those as we move along. And I think one of the key components that's really going to be helpful for us going into next year is the alignment to the budget, so that you can see, as we make adjustments, if we cut in this area, what does it do to performance? What does it mean to graffiti turnaround times? And you've begun to see some of that even in our budget discussions this year, as we indicated the impacts of the budget rescissions in this budget that Mark's rolling out on graffiti abatement. Any number of issues, the hours that centers are closed, and what the impact is to the bottom line. That's because of this kind of initiative and this kind of data. We have a family of measures, so we're not just looking at outcomes. We're looking at results, outputs, demands, and efficiencies. I won't go into a whole lot of detail there, but there is a lot of detail for every program we have. And there will be measures for every program to this level of detail in all 4 categories. What I'd like to do is ask Fire, Rick Rossi to come up and join me, Karen Coyne to come up and join me, Joe Marcella and Jim Carmody to come join me up here. And we're very quickly going to just share with you some of the results of the departments who are kind of first out of the chute, 4 of your first 6 departments, kind of what they're seeing. So we have 1 slide for each department, so it may just whet your appetite, or you may say, Betsy, please be quiet, sit down, I'm ready to talk about the budget. But I think this is really critical to how we develop the budget for you this year. So, Rick, with that, I'll turn it over to you.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. I'm Rick Gracia, Deputy Fire Chief, Support Services, Las Vegas Fire and Rescue. While we've had many changes initiated and results realized as a result of Performance Plus, the three that we'd like to highlight today are related to certain aspects of our service. The first one is one of the components involved in our total response time. The second one deals with our procure-to-pay process, how we fiscally manage our budget. And finally, the third one is related to our ambulance transport program. What we were able to do in the fire alarm office, which is the first point of contact that we get from your constituents who need our services, is we are getting better at taking those true emergency calls and getting the notification of firefighters as fast as possible to shorten the response time in those calls where it really, really matters. As you know, some of our emergencies are less severe than others. As a result of Performance Plus, over the last 9 months, we've realized a 70% increase in the number of those calls that we're able to get out in less than 60 seconds, which is a performance goal. It's a brand-new program initiated by the Fire Alarm Office that's working wonderfully. About the time that Chief Gammon was appointed Fire Chief, and he gave me my new assignment, which is partially responsible for overseeing the budget, we got some news through the Team Las Vegas meetings that there were some issues in fire regarding our procurement process and how we process some of our transactions. We immediately started to drill down and look at that. As a result, we wrote a performance measure that evaluates not only our petty cash use, which is our P-card use, but also the way that we process our financial transactions through Oracle. I'm happy to say that on just a pure percentage basis, we've reduced the amount of errors by 20%, but when you look at the number in pure errors, we've reduced that by 39% when compared to the first part of the fiscal year to the second part, at least through the third quarter. Finally, in our ambulance transport program, another thing that Chief Gammon did was he was able to clearly communicate to our staff what our true goal was for each paramedic ambulance that we have out there, and that would be to transport twice per day. We were doing about 1.02 transports per day per unit in July of '07, and I'm happy to say that through March of 2008, we finally reached our goal of 2, as he made clear that was our goal. So we've realized an 85% increase in the number of transports that's provided on a daily basis by each one of our rescue ambulances.
Thanks, Rick. Next, we have Jim Carmody.
Good morning, Mr. Mayor, Council. Good afternoon. The court has 3 lines of business: customer support services, courtroom support, and alternative sentencing and education. What I wanted to do is just point out in customer support a couple of things that have dramatically occurred at the court as a result of the attention we've been paying to certain measures as a result of Performance Plus. The first one, without getting into the changes initiated and the results, you can see that there. The two of the many items that I could have addressed today with you is our front counter. One of the goals we had is to see individuals who get tickets like you and me, let them come in, take care of their business, and get out of there within 15 minutes, not stand around and wait. In November of 2007, we had 18,000 customers come to our counter. 5,994 were serviced within 15 minutes. In April of this year, we had 20,002 customers come to our counter, and we serviced 16,219 of them within 15 minutes. The reason for this is the manager of that operation is on real time. He's looking at windows open and transaction time on an hourly basis and adjusts as the need arises. Secondly, we want to do something to increase the way that individuals could take care of their business without coming to the court, and we did that primarily right now through the telephone. We will do IVR and web payments as soon as we get our new case management system. But basically, in April, we had 191,000 calls to the court to conduct court business. That was a 29% increase over the prior year. And we collected $3.6 million in funds, or a 69% increase over the same period last year. And that is, in large measure, the result of the fact that we're measuring this kind of performance in real time. Thank you.
Joe, I think you got a next one. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Joe Marcella, Director of Information Technologies. The Information Technologies Department is responsible to all of the other departments. It's more of a service organization, somewhat like HR and the Finance Department. So our processes and our responsibility is to help service not only the community, but the internal community as well. So what we do is, as much as possible, make these systems as efficient and as available as we possibly can. And one of the best ways to illustrate that is some of the adoption that's happened through transaction processing. One of the things that is mentioned on this slide is we've had an 18% increase in financial transactions over the counter and in through the city. But what's very, very important is that 19%, almost 20%, we have a goal of 30%, is being adopted on the web. What we continue to do on the web is to focus the online business according to the way our citizens actually live and use these systems, what they're used to in the private sector as well, and how they deal with businesses. So we've provided government to them 24/7. We've added 4 interactive web applications. Now, that may not sound significant, but those applications are the same kinds of applications that would be done at a counter where someone had to come to City Hall. We have 10 on the boards that will be delivered at the end of this month. We've web-enabled high-volume city types of transactions. That means those are the simple transactions, the straightforward transactions, doors on Fords, if you will. Those things that are assembly line that really shouldn't have to be done by an intelligent individual, that can be done by a machine, leaving our folks available to do those things that are necessary to answer questions that take the research and analysis that's necessary. Now, what happens with that is we've obviously got citizens that are no longer traveling to City Hall. 20% adoption is good. That's contributing to our sustainability effort. We've decreased our internal per transaction cost as much as $32.75 per. A transaction, there goes my banking background, an ATM transaction. A web transaction is about 25 cents. An email to one of our staff is about $8. But when you're sitting there with a profit and loss statement and all the systems they have to use, it's about $33. So that 25 cents to the $33 is significant in the difference, and they're not driving to City Hall. And the last thing is we've ensured per transaction security. Believe it or not, you're more secure, and we can protect your privacy better with a web transaction rather than having you at the counter with all the paperwork and everything else that comes through because of the systems that we have in place. We think we're making a significant contribution both to making the individual applications less expensive, more available, and obviously increasing customer service. Thank you.
And then our final presenter from the departmental standpoint is Karen Coyne from Detention and Enforcement.
Good afternoon, Karen Coyne for the record, Your Honor, council members. It's certainly exciting and empowering for staff at all levels to identify ways that we can save money and implement efficiencies and streamline our operation. But I'll tell you that this process is not for wimps. Ready or not, you are armed with some information that forces you to take action and make some decisions even when they are not popular. When we did our deep and broad operational review, we realized that we use a number of tools to accomplish the targeted goals that we set, which in the 2 programs I'm going to discuss today is our Deputy City Marshal program and then our Inmate Custody Management program. One of those tools that we were utilizing was K9. Now, this was an immensely popular 10-year-old program, and we were faced with the reality that this program no longer served us well. We not only have the ability to accomplish the goals that we set with the officers that we have and the number of other tools on our belt, but we also have great partnerships with our other public safety partners to provide that type of service should we need it. The constant review with our fellow directors, the city manager's office, and then our future report outs to this board is really going to ultimately accomplish for all of us transparency, and so that's the ultimate goal. As a result of eliminating the K9 program from both our field and detention operations, we're anticipating a $400,000 savings annually. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen. I think you can see from just this snapshot that a lot of people are taking this process very seriously. And you can see that it yields significant benefit. And it also affords the departments an opportunity to really refine and fine-tune what they do to serve their customers and do it in the most cost-effective way. And it's all from just looking at the data and listening to the employees, their ideas about what's working and what's not, and what are we really trying to accomplish. So what do we have to look forward to as we go into this next year of Performance Plus implementation? One, we have to finish those last 4 business plans. We hope to have those done by the fall. Your city management team is going to review all of the existing plans that are in place to update them going into next year. We also will have our performance results aligned with your council priorities. We're already working on that, and we'll be reporting back to you on how we see that starting to shape up. Your city manager team is going to put together that city manager plan that addresses those cross-cutting issues that no one department can address by themselves. We also plan on having the city departments realign to the budgets based on performance information so that you can see what we're spending and what it results in very clearly. I mentioned too the communications plan. We also plan on working with you in a mini workshop this fall to implement this alignment effort to make sure that as we go through this process, the things that at a departmental level we think feed up and support your priorities, that you agree. And if you don't agree, then we have time to adapt and realign. And then finally, get the budgets in alignment with the performance results. So one other thing that's still out there that really requires some work is the potential of doing a survey for our citizens along a lot of lines. This whole process is focused on customer desires. And so at some point we need to get out there and get some direct data and direct feedback from the citizens that we serve. That's something that we have on the agenda that we'd like to get accomplished over the course of the next several months. I wouldn't imagine necessarily within a year, but could be within a year if we can afford to do so. I went through this pretty quickly. I wanted to give you an overview, and I hope that this has been helpful to you leading up to Mark's presentation, and also hopefully to show one of the major tools we'll be using during this fundamental review process. And I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have.
Mayor? Thank you very much, Ms. Fretwell. Are there any comments or questions at this time?
Yes, I do.
Councilman Barlow.
Yes, Ms. Fretwell. A couple questions. What is the average time it has taken to go through the evaluation process of Performance Plus for each department?
Well, they go through a series of steps. There's initially about 3 days that are set aside that the department director works with a trained facilitator, either internal or external. We've been building up our internal facilitators. They spend 3 days where they go through, they identify their strategic issues, their strategic results, and really start to begin to flesh out some of those major program areas. Then they take a break. They work it in their department, so there's some time spent there. Then they get back together for a couple more days where they continue to refine their strategic business plan. After they've kind of identified what the outcomes are, Councilman, then they back into, well, what are some of those measures that will tell us that we're guilty of doing what we said we were going to do, that we actually will have accomplished that outcome. Then they spend a tremendous amount of time and effort throughout their departments at many different levels of the organization to identify those measures all the way down to the program level, and a very thorough service list. Every service that fits in every program is identified in this process. So it's lengthy. It takes about 3 months to get from top to bottom to get it done. Then there's a review by the city manager's office, a group we call the Performance Plus executive team, a few department heads, the city manager, and the 3 deputies. We sit back and we review those business plans and those measures. And once that review is complete, then the plan is basically signed off on. and that's what the department begins to implement and live up to. So 3 months, I would say, maybe for plan development, and then probably another month or two to actually get the plan completely through a review process and signed off on.
And my second question is, this may be a little bit off the subject, but I believe it's still in line with the Performance Plus process, and that is, have we considered or given some level of thought to expanding our city marshals' roles and responsibility, making them possibly equivalent to that of the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department, and seeing how, in fact, there may be pros or cons or the benefits or the lack thereof as it relates to expanding their role?
Yes, Councilman, actually, the short answer is yes. In fact, one of the things that we're considering asking for additional legislative authorization is to expand the jurisdiction of the marshals beyond what it is today. That's going to take a little bit of work, but it will require legislative change as well. So that's on our list, and at the end of the summer, we'll be coming back to you with our bill draft list. That could very well be one of the issues that lands on that final request up to the state legislature for review and hopefully adoption.
So it is something that we are taking
Yes,
a
sir.
serious look at.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Any other comments or questions?
Betsy, if you turn around, they look like there are 4 lined up for a firing squad here.
Well, I asked them to stay just in case you had questions about their particular slide, so I didn't let them off the hook.
No, I think it's great. This is the kind of program I think it's mandatory now, setting a great foundation. But just a couple quick questions for each presenter. Chief, as far as the fire, one of the results realized, you indicated that we're close to 2 transports per day per unit. And has that had any impact or adverse impact on the coverage issues as far as call-outs elsewhere?
No, Councilman. We're running the same volume of emergency medical responses that we did before. The difference is that we believe we're providing a much higher level of care based on the fact that we're there first. We go ahead and initiate the transport earlier. The patient gets a better outcome, and it's just a more efficient model.
Great. Thank you. Did everybody know what a web adoption rate was? Okay.
Are they trying to embarrass me?
No, I just was looking for someone to... But I guess it's a term, Joe, right?
Yes, it is.
That's what, you don't even have to explain. I don't want to know. And Chief, Chief Coyne, if I could quote you and paraphrase, if not verbatim, this process is not for wimps. I would just like to use her example, which I think is a perfect example. The whole canine patrol, that was a city service and city function that people enjoyed, visibility, customer service, public image, and yet a decision was made to move away from it with a savings of hundreds of thousands of dollars. I mean, and if that's the kind of decision that's not going to be for wimps. Those are the programs that I think some of us on the council may say it's great. Some departments may feel that it's untouchable and the public loves it. But these are the kind of evaluations that are critically important for this to be successful. And I know we all have our little pet projects, pardon the play on words with canine, and we have departments that have some of the untouchable areas. And I would just send a word of caution to the wind here that we have to strip everything naked. We have to look at every service, every program, every function we do. And some of those that would have been deemed untouchable just a few years ago need to be put through this process as far as evaluating efficiencies and relating back to council priorities and core services. Is this something the city of Las Vegas should be doing as a local government? I think it's a great analogy. I thank you for the quote. I'll be using that a lot, not for the wimps. And Dr. Selby and Betsy and everyone that's participated, this is a phenomenal program. I mean, kudos to everybody that's been involved and all the work that's gone into it.
Councilman, if I may, I think it's a way of doing business, and it's a different way of doing business. And it really is changing the way we make decisions in this organization and peeling back the layers of the onion in a way that we've not been able to do before. And I hope it is helpful to you as you have to make some tough decisions considering our financial situation.
This is very much the type of thinking that successful businesses in the private sector utilize. It's business-oriented, and my only question is, what did we do before we had Performance Plus? How did we make these decisions, or did we just go merrily on our way?
Double-digit revenue growth.
So under that circumstance, we didn't have to pare down, we didn't have to peel off the layers of the onion. We were sort of in a mode of complacency, providing services and having satisfied constituents and not worry about tightening the belt. And now, because of the economic times, this is a necessity. Is that basically what's taking place?
I think it's actually a different level of scrutiny and different level of accountability and transparency that we're trying to reach. I've been working for the city for almost 8 years. This strategic planning integration model has been my passion for those 8 years. And what I've seen is a complete commitment on the part of the City Council to really focus in on a strategic objective, and a commitment from the leadership at the administrative levels, the department heads of the organization, to do the very best we can within the resources that we've been allocated. And this system is just, we were ready. We were ready for this system. We've been working through a strategic planning process. We've been working through basically activity-based accounting processes where we actually can get to numbers that are meaningful. We were ready for this system. So I don't think we were going merrily along, you know. I think everybody was working really hard, and we would periodically drill down to this level of data that you're starting to see now on an as-needed basis, or when a question came up of why do we do it that way, why does it cost so much. Now we have a system in place that it'll be much easier to get those answers on a consistent basis, and we'll also be able to keep our eye on the ball, if you will. We regularly review these plans. These department heads come and present how well they're doing every quarter. Not every year, not every 2 years, every quarter. And you can ask any one of them that have been through that review. Those questions are not pansy questions. There are some really hard questions that get asked of them. And they either have the answer or they don't, and if they don't, they go get it. But it just makes us better and stronger as an organization. And I think we were ready to take this next step into this model.
All right, I'd like to ask Mr. Carmody, what triggered, was it Performance Plus that triggered something in your mind that said, gee whiz, these people are standing around the counter waiting for a period which is too long, and then because of Performance Plus, you were able to pull it back and make it livable?
No.
What happens?
That isn't it at all. Wait times at our front counter has been an issue forever. What Performance Plus did is give us the ability to measure on a daily. What we did is put into place two issues. There are only two things that control wait time: how many windows you have open and how long it takes for a transaction. Those are the two pieces. What you need to be able to do if you're going to maintain wait times reasonably is you need to manage those on an hourly basis. If you let people get into the counter and you get 500 people in the queue, doesn't matter how many windows you have open, you cannot catch up. So you've got to be proactive on windows open. That was a piece of it. This database allows us, and we insist that be looked at on an hourly basis. You can't wait till the end of the day. It's too late. What happened today is gone. So real-time management is the issue there. We've paid attention to it, but not at that level. Secondly, we had to figure out ways, because Metro has more officers, more citations are being written, more people are coming in, we're getting more cases. That is good and bad. and we don't have more people. We have to figure out ways to service that population without forcing them to come downtown to take care of business. That means phones, that means interactive voice response, that means web. Those are the things that Joe and I now, because of Performance Plus, which says, get out of the silo, get together, figure out how you need to make this work, we will be moving to those. We started with phone, credit card payment. So it isn't that we haven't been, and we have been paying attention to many of those things. It's the degree and the level to which we pay attention at what time frame.
Thank you.
I might also add, Mayor, that there's a difference in philosophy in the way we're implementing this. Many times when you go through reviews, they're highly critical and sometimes punitive. Some managers could have looked at Chief Coyne and said, "You mean you've had an underperforming canine program for 10 years?" Instead, we created an environment where she could come forward and say, "This very popular program that costs us $500,000 a year needs to go away, and I need to know I have your support to make it go away because I need to have more marshals out on the street, more productive, now." So it's a way to encourage calculated risk-taking and a way to make this a rewarding process, not a punitive one, where the department heads and their team and their employees can come up with new ways to accomplish old goals in a lot of ways.
All right, well, it looks like, at least in its inception, it's working. And we congratulate you for putting this into place, and we'll keep on monitoring very closely.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Mayor?
Yes, absolutely.
My understanding, this Performance Plus management is something that has been used in businesses before, and businesses often have criticized public entities because they don't use this type of evaluation of performance and then matching to budget. Am I correct or not? It sounds like something I'd heard before from businesses, and sometimes people are very critical of public agencies. And because, as Councilman Brown said, we had the funds, and you're not watching it as carefully or looking at duplications as much. Am I understanding that correctly?
This is very similar to other business models that the private sector employs. And I do think we're cutting edge. I mean, we're not in this alone. There are many local government organizations that strive to be high-performing, transparent, and accountable.
Well, and this is what many businesses have said, and many people who are critical of public government have said that we don't do enough of this. And so it's tremendous that you are doing it, and it's tremendous that you're finding these results. Now, can I just ask another question? If you use these in the process, would you use these on all kinds of projects within the city? For example, if you were going to build a fire station, would you use Performance Plus there?
Absolutely. In fact, if you recall Chief Gammon's presentation at council meeting last month, he went through a whole process where he utilized response rates, coverage areas, manpower needs, et cetera, to develop that 10-year plan.
So could we then also use it on our new city hall? Would we use Performance Plus on that?
Well, I'm not sure you would use this exact same methodology, but you could use components of it.
Which some people who build large entities are using, right? Some construction companies?
Yes, usually what you would try and figure out in that kind of process is the valuation, for instance, that Scott has rolled out for you in the City Hall analysis. What are the overall economic impacts, for instance? You might build into it, well, what is our overall goal? Do we want to be more focused on electronic documentation, having people online, not inline? Can you build a smaller building? Is this a more effective use of the space and the asset? A lot of that analysis goes into project-by-project analysis.
And so you're going to be looking at duplications also. For example, as you've peeled these onion skins back, it's helped me see there are some duplications in departments. Maybe we have a graphic arts specialist in every single department, and is that the best way to work? Or maybe we have a public information person in every department. I'm not saying which way is the best way to work,
right,
but you will be looking at those things very closely, as I understand from what you've said.
Absolutely. And what it's done is it's allowed all of us to really focus in on what are we trying to accomplish with that. if we do have public information officers designated in a variety of departments, is that the best way to deliver that service? And if so, great, but at least we've asked the question. And is there a different way to get those same results, deliver those same results in a different, more cost-effective way? Possibly, but at least now we're looking at those things in a comprehensive fashion.
I just think it's excellent, Betsy, and
Thank
all
you.
of you that are involved in it, and it takes some courage to do it. It takes some strong leadership ability to do it, but in doing it, you're going to make tremendous progress, not only in what we're going to be able to accomplish, but in managing the monies involved. Thank you so much.
Sure.
Anybody else? All right, may I have a motion, please?
Yes, Your Honor. I would move to follow staff's recommendation and accept this report. And again, thanks to Betsy and all the staff from all the City Council and Mayor.
Is that a motion? All right. Let's vote, please. Post. Post.
I'm sorry. Your Honor, please go ahead and call this.
Okay, can we, let's vote again, please?
Wait.
Let's not vote again. All right, let's vote again, please. Post. All right, let's do a hand vote. All those in favor? It's all right. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. All right, item number 5. This will be a public hearing and possible action regarding fiscal year 2009 City of Las Vegas tentative budget and fiscal year 2009 City of Las Vegas final budget, including the 5-year capital improvement plan. This is a public hearing, which I now declare open. Mr. Vincent?
Thank you, Your Honor. Mark Vincent, Director of Finance and Business Services. If I can, I'd just like my perspective and what I've seen from being on the PPIT committee. There's at least 3 dozen stories like you just heard today, and some of them have to do with some of the cost-saving issues that you heard today, but some of them had to do with reorganization structures. Some of them have to do with departments recognizing that they have joint or overlapping responsibilities, as Councilwoman Tarkanian mentioned. So I really think there's a lot of things that are going to step up from that process as time goes on. And Councilman Brown, when you said web adoption, I thought it had something to do with foster children. I didn't know. So. Today I'd like to recap a little bit of what we talked about at the budget workshop. Some of these slides are a little bit redundant from what we've talked about in the past, but generally speaking, we are looking at a downturn. I think our projections show that fiscal year 2010, from our revenue perspective, will be the bottom year, and then we'll start to see ourselves climb back out. The last 3 fiscal years, 7, 8, and 9, we're looking at an average revenue increase rate of 2.1%. I think you may have noticed in the article today, but the county is struggling with not being able to add any positions when their revenue is growing at 5.8%. So today I'd love to be standing in front of you with a 5.8% revenue growth, but that's not the case. I think, as I mentioned at the workshop, our revenue is going to stabilize somewhere around the 6 to 7% range. I hope. I think we'll get there eventually. And some of these other things we've talked about in the past. The budget reductions that we've taken, which and for fiscal year 2009 is a little over $20 million. I expect that those cuts will have to stay in place. That's about 186 vacant positions that will ultimately have to be maintained as vacant positions for several years to come. We had several issues that we talked about at the budget workshop, and I thought it would be useful to kind of review them right now. Dr. Selby talked about the fundamental review that and how Performance Plus, Betsy talked about that, how that relates to that process. We talked about senior meals. And this budget contemplates that we will reinstate senior meals by making a nominal reduction in each of your budgets. So that will allow us to restore 100% of the senior meal programs that are being executed by Leisure Services. We also were able to reinstate all the neighborhood cleanups by altering how we deliver those services and teaming with Republic Services. My understanding in talking with Director Harson is that Republic Services has been very responsive to working collaboratively with us to do those neighborhood cleanups. We also, Leisure Services, Dr. Jackson presented to you a new set of schedules for the centers that minimizes the impacts of the closing. Some of those centers that we were looking at keeping closed on Sunday are now going to be open on Sunday, and I think you received that list already. And then finally, just for your information, the final budget that we're proposing today does reinstate about $67,000 that the Audit Committee recommended that we reinstate for Brad Snelding's Audit Committee. So I just wanted to put that on the record as well. A high-level recap, our total city budget's growing at about 7%, but it's primarily happening in the areas outside of the general fund, primarily in the Sanitation Enterprise Fund and in our capital program. A population growth, the 603,000 population count was from our planning department. I think the actual state numbers will be less than that when those come out.
Less than 603,000 in the city?
I think so.
I thought we were up around 650. No?
Nope.
Yeah, where is Perigo? No, I'm kidding.
He's doing work while Margot's sitting in the audience, I think. General fund, a nominal growth of 1% there, and of course that's all of what we've been talking about for the last several months. This picture here highlights a few things. One thing that's interesting, if you look at the consolidated tax right here that I'm highlighting in green, several years ago, the consolidated tax was about 53% of our general fund revenues. It is now 46%. That's not because the others are growing faster. It's just because C-Tax right now is in the doldrums, and we're looking at significant negative growth. And I've updated a chart here I'll share with you in a little bit. But there have been one significant change from our budget workshop to here, and that is in area C-Tax. We actually have reduced our 2009 consolidated tax revenue estimates by $2.6 million. So that's the one significant change that we've had on the revenue side. Flipping over to the expenditure side, the slide still looks proportionately pretty much as we've always seen it. Public safety is 60% of our expenditures. There are a few items that we have adjusted, and I wanted to bring them to your attention. There has been while there was a net reduction in revenues of about $2.6 million, we've had a net reduction in our costs of about $2.2 million, and I wanted to highlight what some of those things were for you. We, as a result of our briefings, we have gone ahead with eliminating merits and bonuses for the appointed employees for this upcoming year. They will receive COLA only. We made several adjustments to leisure services budget, one of which was the elimination of the tennis channel funding. Others were better alignment of the personnel that are supporting SafeKey and programs like SafeKey and Senior Law, and transferring those resources to the Special Revenue Fund, thereby getting them out of the general fund and putting those resources entirely in the Special Revenue Fund. That's going to save us in this budget about $3.4 million. We also saved about $1 million with the Metro budget. From their tentative to final, they saved us $1 million. Conversely, though, we had to transfer out $1.7 million for the Green Building Fund. That was the resolution that you passed last year. We also transferring out some net rent revenues from the new atrium facility. We're transferring those out to the Capital Project Fund to help pay for the tenant improvements that we have to do at the atrium.
Your Honor, the two new positions, that last statement you made, are those city employees?
Those will be city employees. One is an HVAC tech, and the other one is
not managing the property, just taking care of the property.
One will be taking care of it. The other one will be a property administrator that I believe will be managing that facility as well as other facilities as well.
Is that a new classification, property manager 1 or 2?
I don't know the answer to that question, Councilman. I don't know. Claudette may have the answer to that. I don't know the answer to that question.
That's okay. Why don't you continue with the presentation?
But those two, again, those two positions are being offset by revenues. This is the chart. This is the chart that I just updated for the our estimate of the third quarter. We only have 2 months in the current and the third quarter of fiscal year 2008. If I were to extrapolate those out, the third quarter for 2008 looked like it's going to come in about 5.5% less than it did the previous year. So we are continuing this cycle here that I'm not sure we've seen the bottom of the C-tax yet. I like to believe we have, but every month there's another new surprise for me. We've talked about the impacts of the budget cuts at the budget workshop. These remain pretty much unchanged. They're the same impact we've talked about before. We're talking about no executive adjustments, COLA adjustments only for appointees. We're talking about no reductions in overtime and supportive events. We've talked about non-city events, that we wouldn't sponsor those unless we got 100% cost recovery of our services to support those events, whether they be special events or parades or things of that nature. And we've also talked about deferral of some of our capital equipment replacement in multiple areas. We also, at the budget workshop, talked about our budget cuts and the fact that we started with an across-the-board cut, but that's not exactly where we left off. We actually had to make some adjustments and try to be creative in achieving the necessary cuts that we thought were needed to deal with the revenue shortfalls. But this slide shows that when the dust settled, public safety only recognized about a 1% cut. In public safety would be our metro contribution, which is about $143 million, including our share of certain capital costs. And in the areas of public works, economic development, culture and recreation, some of those larger reductions are a result of some of the changes I mentioned in terms of trying to get some of the general fund labor off the backs of the general fund and get it so it's more reimbursable. For example, in public works, the ability to take engineers and charge them directly to capital projects that are funded by other sources, including the RTC and the flood district and SNPLMA, while they provide necessary services, if we can substitute our engineers for hiring contractual engineers, we can deliver the project at the same cost but take some of that burden off the general fund. In the area of economic development, most of the savings is a result of transferring the balance of economic development into the RDA fund so that it would pay for that. And I mentioned culture and recreation a little while ago, trying to align the costs of the safety and other services with the special revenues, with the special revenue funds. Where we stand, this is a graph or a chart I presented to you last at the workshop. For 2009, without the budget reductions, we would be looking at a $40.7 million shortfall. With the budget reductions and our ability to draw down our fund balance, we will be finishing fiscal year 2009 with an 11.9% fund balance, which is roughly equivalent to what our budget policy is. And as we roll forward into fiscal year 2010, which I believe will be the bottom year, I'm not sure that 2009, if the recovery starts a little sooner, a little more aggressive, maybe the 2009 is our bottom year, but on our current forecast, we're thinking that 2010 will be. And that, in that case, we're looking at a shortfall of almost $50 million, 21 of it being dealt with by budget cuts. The other $30 million will be serviced from a collection of money that we are going to isolate and freeze. Now, we've talked about a revenue stabilization fund, and we mentioned in the past that are concerned about the way NRS 354 reads, that until that language is changed, that we're a little bit leery about putting our revenue all in that special revenue stabilization fund. We'll be working with the legislative team to try to make some changes to that. But meanwhile, we have identified that revenue, we know where it is, and we're freezing it in place, and we expect to have to use it in fiscal year 2010.
Mayor Goodman.
Yes.
May I, please? Mr. Vinson, I'm looking at your chart right now, and I'm trying to follow the flow, if you will, and I see the fiscal year '09 ending fund balance of $63.8 million, about 12%. That's money that's left over at the end of fiscal year. From an accounting standpoint, what happens to that money? Is it carried into FY10?
It is.
If so, should it be put on the chart?
It's not carried unless we plan to spend it. It remains in fund balance as our one and only reserve, or one and only official reserve. Remember, I have slides right after this. I'll show you where we talk about how fund balance as a number of weeks of float, if you will, from a business perspective or personal perspective. You would never spend down to zero your operating bank account for your business or your personal bank account at home. You wouldn't do that. You would always have some reserve because you just never know what unforeseen things might happen. And so this is, fund balance really is our only official reserve that we have, and that's why we established as a policy that we try to maintain at least a 12% fund balance. And that 12% policy is one of the reasons why we're able to receive 2 bond upgrades in the last 3 years. So it doesn't carry over unless you plan to spend it. In this case, what we're saying here, this drawdown right here, Councilman, that $20 million, we are planning on drawing that down. So we will plan on starting the year with a fund balance of $84 million, but we're going to end the year with a fund balance of $64 million. We're going to draw $20 million down. We're planning to do that. If you budget to plan to do that, you can do that. If you don't budget to do it, you can't do it till the next year. It doesn't automatically carry over. When we get to 2010, because the fund balance is close to the 12% policy, we're planning then to use the revenue stabilization. We're going to dip into this other source of funds that we've isolated, which we talked about at the budget workshop. Does that help, Councilman? Yes. So this is the chart of some of the capital projects that we have identified. We've made a few minor changes on this that have actually resulted in a slight increase in our frozen capital project funds. One of the things that we did eliminate was we had originally allocated some money from this reserve for atrium tenant improvements by reaching into the net revenue from the rents on the atrium. We no longer have to allocate that money here, so that's gone out. But we did have to add the fence for Floyd Lamb at Tule Springs, that fence that we're going to need to have to put in for dust abatement or keep people off of it. I think this is just a pretty simple chain link fence for this budget. So we had to add that. But this is a slight increase from what we saw in the budget workshop. And then to recap with the capital project money, we also identified about $7 million in capital that we can defer. We've talked about that before. We talked about other sources of funds. The one that's new here is we've frozen or isolated the green building fund that was created by your resolution. We would suggest that that be frozen, and if need be in 2010 that we would use that as a source as well. So in total, we've identified an additional $32 million in addition to the fund balance we have in the general fund that could help us get through. And then this is the slide that, the infamous detail slide that shows where we are going to use that revenue stabilization, which is right here, that $32 million. And even with that $32 million, we're looking at a shortfall, obviously, in 2009 and here in these years as well. As I pointed out before at the workshop, we identified some categories here about going back and replenishing the vacancies or having program expansion or new capital projects. And you can see that for a good several years to come, we're not really, at this point, thinking that we're going to have sufficient revenue to do any of those things. One of the things we are going to do is, you'll see in a moment, and we talked about at the workshop, there's $1.7 billion in capital in process. Some of that capital is going to require us to maintain and operate it when it comes online. The impacts of that is listed down here on this line. So we are planning on having to increase our operating budget by these incremental amounts, which then become compounded as the years go forward. The other area that we identified, we talked about the budget workshop, is this $2 million in 12 and 13 represents the reduced lease payment for the City Hall facility. So the City Hall is contemplated that we would be making those lease payments in fiscal year 12 and 13. Bear in mind that from our perspective, we're only dealing with this fiscal year here, but I'm showing you our thoughts about the future, because it's the future that's driving us to have to create this revenue stabilization fund. It's the future that's causing us to have to look hard at how we do performance management, how we do the fundamental review, how we look at doing business. And if we don't start now, the future will be here tomorrow, and we'll be sad about that.
Mayor?
Yes, Councilman.
I have a question for Mr. Vincent. Mr. Vincent, for clarification, if you go back to the slide, go back to the overhead.
This one here?
Yes. Well, you erased all your
sorry.
green highlight. But under the cumulative new debt services?
This one right here?
Yes, sir. But I'll start with the operation and management. Is that for the capital funds?
The new O&M down here?
Yes,
yeah, this is a significant portion of this relates to the resources necessary to staff some of the fire stations that are planned to come online in future years. So that's what a lot of that is.
Right,
In fact,
and that was the point that I was alluding to. If you can just explain in somewhat of detail as to why, in fact, those numbers, as it relates to FY10 through 13, why those numbers are there for the sake of those that may not understand why we have
You're
those
asking a very
monies
good
in
leading
place.
question, and I appreciate that. The poster child for this, of course, is the Centennial Hills Community Center, where we built a 100,000 square foot facility, did not plan to operate it. The plan plan was always from the beginning that we would look at partnering with a nonprofit, but it was the one issue that we knew up front was that we didn't have the staff, and the nonprofit wasn't interested in operating the senior center portion of that. So now we open up a community center that has a senior center facility that has no staff and no one to operate it. And we don't want to be there again. It typically takes anywhere from 2 to 3 fiscal years from the time we fund design to the time you actually see a facility open up. And when we're creating our budget for our operating general fund, we're only budgeting for fiscal year 09. We're budgeting for this year here today. You're not making any appropriations today for those future years. If I didn't put this in front of you, you wouldn't know you had to plan for it. And so in order to avoid the situation that we have with the senior center at Centennial Hills, we have been diligently trying to identify the operating costs associated with all of our capital projects, the ones that are planned out for 5 years, just as a placeholder. So when we put this forecast together, we can say, gee, in fiscal year 2010, we are going to have to expand programs, at least to accommodate the facilities we're building. If you're going to build a fire station, you're going to have to staff it. You need to recognize today that it's going to happen, and so that we don't miss the opportunity to set aside funds to plan for that. So that's what this is. That's what that part's
Right,
about.
and thank you for that clarification, because I wanted that to be transparent so that those who are listening will have an opportunity to understand why, in fact, that forecast is laid out there in the way that you've laid it out, so that individuals will have an opportunity to realize that we have projects and developments already in the pipeline, and they are online to basically turn key at some future point, and for that we must plan
Right.
to make sure that we have enough funds to operate and manage those facilities. The debt services, if you'll just elaborate on that just real briefly, and that would be...
In this case, the program that's contemplated for the agreement with 4 cities, Live Work 4 cities, is that we would enter into a lease purchase agreement for them to construct for us a new facility as part of their 5-block development. That will be structured as a lease purchase agreement where we enter into a lease that has a funds appropriation clause, which means if you fail to appropriate money in any fiscal year to pay our lease payment, that we're not legally bound by that. However, having said that, that lease purchase agreement is the basis for developing the financing to construct that facility. Whether Forest City does it or the city does it, someone's got to turn that lease into resources, financing resources that they can use to build the City Hall. So a lease purchase is a mechanism that allows us to do that, that legally allows us to treat it as a lease purchase. From an accounting perspective, purely for those accountants in the room, which there probably is just maybe 25 of us in this room, we have to treat that lease purchase as a capitalized lease. So we will treat that City Hall asset, when we take possession of it, it will show up as an asset, and the lease payment will be amortized, partly principal, partly interest. That's just accounting mumbo-jumbo for the most part, but that's physically what we have to do. So I'm showing the lease payment here as a debt service because the lease itself will have to be capitalized. That's an accounting terminology that we'll have to do. And it doesn't matter who finances it, whether the Forest City does or we do, it doesn't matter. The lease purchase agreement will have to be capitalized. So that's what that $2 million represents. The deal was contemplated as that we would, Forest City originally was going to subsidize the lease down to $2 million a year for 5 years, and then after the 5th year, it would balloon up to the full lease amount. At any time during the lease period, we could exercise the option to take that lease out and refinance it ourselves, which is more than likely what we'll end up doing, certainly before the 5-year term is up. Did that answer your question?
Thank you, sir.
Mark, before you leave that chart there, the C-tax, we're predicting a downward turn for next year, but significant growth 10, 11, and 12.
This growth here, 10, 11, and 12, as far as C-tax, is about 3, 6, and 7%. So this is 3%, 6%, 7%. And I don't, frankly, again, I don't, as Councilman Barlow asked me at the last workshop, I don't have a crystal ball. Today, I would say, that might be high, that might be optimistic, but Mayor wants me to be optimistic.
I want you to be optimistic.
He wants me to be aggressive and step out.
You must be aggressive.
So this is a plan. This is not a budget. The only year we're budgeting is fiscal year 09. The rest of this is a plan.
Forecast.
It's a forecast.
It says right there, forecast.
Thank you.
But the C-tax, the whole structure is based on, you're almost rewarded, and this is somewhat general terms, but you're almost rewarded for growth.
That is correct. And the I think it was the 2003 session, the C-tax formula was changed to make it much more responsive to growth. It works both ways. This last few years where we've had negative C-tax growth, Henderson and North Las Vegas have had a far larger reduction, and percentage-wise, in their revenue because they're sharing a larger piece of it because they're growing faster. But when it begins to recover, they'll grow. Their share will grow much faster than ours.
And we were at the time, we were actually harmed by that state law change in 03.
Yes, we were.
Okay. So the question, and this is forecast now, no crystal ball, but the growth of the city, pending some potential litigation out in the Northwest with the conservation transfer area. We talked a little bit about this at the budget workshop. We are going to be the first municipality to see the maturation of our ability to grow, unless something really opens up in the Northwest corridor. So based on the current state tax structure, we will reach that point, forecasting not too distant future, maybe the 5-year window, that we're going to see even our ability to grow with C-tax limited, just by geographically, opposed to some of the other agencies in Southern Nevada.
I think that's accurate. I said at the workshop that in any particular given year, you might think generally that your revenues would grow at the summation of your population growth plus CPI growth. Well, if CPI's 3%, population's 3%, that's a 6% growth. Will our population continue to grow at 3%? Well, it hasn't been as of late. Could it again? Maybe. It depends on how we grow. And a lot of that has to do, a lot of that's tied directly into how we develop as a city, what kind of development we're looking for, and what we do with the urban core. I mean, I think that's part of why the downtown redevelopment is so critical for us, to be able to develop an urban core that now becomes a community for people to live and work, and if we can grow up as opposed to out, well, that's just as good. In my mind, that's just as good as anything else. So we probably have to change how we think about how we're going to grow, and I think that's a point that Margot Wheeler and the planning folks have made, and OBD as well, that we just have to rethink how we're going to grow in the future.
And optimistically, as the mayor has indicated, with the RDA, potentially that could ultimately become the bank that the general fund will go to for 10, 15, 20 years down the road.
If I had the bad news, good news, the RDA is the good news, and that's why I saved it for the end.
Then a comment that maybe we'll talk about after your presentation, but just looking at the forecast on C-tax, property tax, and then bring it down to the labor. And that's something that I don't think Performance Plus really delves into. It's how we operate, the efficiencies. But that's something that we're going to have to address. As far as the labor costs of a public agency, and in our situation, versus the potential for the maturing of our community and ultimately the growth of our tax base. Those two certainly don't mix.
I think that's clear that that's the case, and I think you're exactly right. I started on 10 years ago, right at the beginning of the big boom, and those were good days. Just for clarity, the 6.7% growth rate, just so you understand how this formula works, the new O&M line down here, that gets added up into here. So part of the 6.7 growth rate is new positions. Okay, we've said before that all things being equal, labor costs grow at about 5.5% to 6% a year, just on the basis of contractual requirements. This is growing at 6.7 because we're adding new staff to deal with the new fire stations and such.
And with the fundamental review, and perhaps indirectly back to Performance Plus, the opportunity to look at ways of providing services, the negotiations as far as the new janitorial position, the partnership with the YMCA, those type opportunities could certainly impact the forecasting of labor and how we provide those services.
Well, I was talking to Leisure Services this morning on another subject, and maybe how we look at how we provide service in our larger rec centers may be an opportunity as well.
I don't think it's exclusive to leisure. That's certainly the most profiled of our probably customer service-based activities, but I think that's part of the fundamental review as far as even other departments and services we provide. The fundamental question, should we, the public sector, be providing them? Are there ways to partner, or possibly are there ways to just allow others to do that for us? I think that has to be part of the public discourse over the next 6 months or 5 months when this review's taken place.
It's not for wimps.
It's not for wimps.
Mayor Goodman, may I please?
Yes.
And Councilman Brown, you started to go where I was going to go next. And Mark, could I have you draw a line under FY09, or just basically across the chart under labor to highlight
this line right here?
Yes, and I understand you're calling this a forecast, but I think we have to do this. We're projecting our costs, and I think you said that 75% of our cost is labor. And I did a little quick math. If we go from FY09 to FY10, was that about a 6 or a 7% jump? And then when we go from FY10 to FY11, that jump is even greater, and so forth.
Right.
Is the 6.7% at the far right an average of the jumps between 09, 10, 11, 12, and 13?
Short answer is yes. What it is, it's the annual percentage rate, how you get from 284 to 393 in 5 years. But the short answer is yes, it's an average growth rate.
Here's my question. When we talk about performance review that Dr. Jackson is going to head up, and perhaps we're going to have an outside consultant help her with, that doesn't include a separate review, yes or no, of our labor cost issues. That's a separate review. Is that right, Dr. Selby?
Councilman, it comes into play because we look at how we provide services. The labor element is a critical part, and in some cases, it's the majority of that. So as we do the fundamental review, just a logical analysis will suggest we have to look at how we staff those things and the cost of staffing. The change, though, to fundamental wages and benefits has to be done through collective bargaining.
Okay. And I understand that. When we undertake a performance review, part of that is the labor involved in certain, the running of certain programs, et cetera. What and when steps are we going to take regarding the collective bargaining? And I certainly want to encourage all of our collective bargaining units to participate in this discussion. We invite them to participate in the discussion. We want them to participate. We want our employees to understand fully the predicament, if you will, that we're in as leaders of this city. So can you outline for me, Dr. Selby or Mark, what particular steps are we going to take in this review?
The process for us to make any changes to wages or benefits is done when the contracts are open for reconsideration. The one coming up next will be with the firefighters. That contract expires in June of 2009, so we'll probably begin negotiations at the beginning of next calendar year. The class and compensation study will help us to determine what is a reasonable compensation for that work group, and we'll incorporate that in our negotiations. With regard to contracts that have longer periods of time, if we get into a crunch where we can't afford to provide programs, it would be up to the labor organization to work with us on reopening a contract earlier. I can't unilaterally do that. All I could do is reduce the amount of labor that we use, but not the cost of labor. So either through the scheduled reopening of the contracts on their normal expiration dates, or perhaps earlier if we can work with the bargaining units in good faith to determine a way to maybe have some concessions earlier that would allow us to make our way through and preserve our workforce.
Do we do anything along this way to educate our employees? Certainly we've got, a couple hundred people in the room right now, and word filters down, and I know that we have a lot of smart people that work for the City of Las Vegas, but do we hold seminars or any kind of educational courses, if you will, to educate our employees on exactly where we're at and why we might be going in a certain direction?
We don't have formal seminars as such, but I do have regular what we call meet the manager meetings and other opportunities for dialogue with work groups, and I always have been taking the opportunity over the last 6 months to educate them on our budget, on the challenges we face with our revenue and what's actually been happening lately, and just introduce the subject. And I think by and large our workforce understands where we're at. I've received some really positive comments from workers who have actually offered some very creative ideas, including some offering just personal sacrifices to work shorter hours, things that we can't take advantage of because they're all subject to bargaining. But I think our workforce by and large understands where we're at, and we're making every effort to continue to communicate with them that they're important to us. They're perhaps our most important asset in a downturn like this, because we want them to remain motivated to do a good job and to excel in their service to the community, but at the same time understand that we can't provide all of the resources that we have in the past.
I might add that Dr. Selby mentioned the city of Vallejo and the bankruptcy. It is my understanding, at least from the articles that I've read, was that one of the reasons that propelled them into bankruptcy was the reluctance from the bargaining units to reopen those negotiations. So the city was forced with no other option but to declare bankruptcy because they couldn't function. So that's just, as Dr. Selby says, he can't force it.
My final comment on this area is my personal philosophy, and I've stated this before, is that I think that our employees that work for the city of Las Vegas right now that have a certain expectation because they signed on to come to work for the city of Las Vegas with an expectation of certain benefits, whether it be wages or other benefits, should be viewed differently than new employees, perhaps, because if I was somebody who'd given my blood, sweat, and tears for the city of Las Vegas for 5 or 10 or 15 or 20 or 30 years, I don't think it necessarily is appropriate to adjust those expectations because we rely on things. But looking to the future, and I think that's what you said, Mark, I think that's our obligation is to look to the future. So perhaps when we talk about future hirees, future employees, that's where we should focus our efforts. Thank you.
Councilman Ross.
Mr. Vinson, you made comment about something that I wasn't aware of about the city of Vallejo, and council members recognize that our city manager has been keeping us posted with his bulletins on the finances and other areas in the country that are being hit by these economic times. I would have liked to have known that, and Dr. Selby, that been a part of that information as to how the city got into that position, that the collective bargaining units were reluctant to work with the city of Vallejo. I wasn't aware of that. That wasn't in your bulletins, and I look forward to those because they keep me up to speed as to what's going on. And I want to make a comment to Councilman Wolfson on the city's intranet site that I have up now is a whole bunch of information that the city manager's office and the city executive team makes available to all the members of the employees in the city to keep abreast, because I know we'd had this conversation about making sure that the employees of the city are aware of where we're going, whether it's the new city hall or whether it's these budget issues. So I appreciate you doing that, Dr. Selby, and that's just one piece of information I wasn't aware of.
I think that article, I just saw it late last week, and I don't know who sent it to me. It wasn't in part of the bulletins, but it's a very recent article.
Councilman, I think we tend to summarize things, and as a result, I think we probably left out some of the detail, but I have all of the backup, and be happy to share that.
Well, if I can, Your Honor, again, there are so many things that can affect these budgets throughout the country and during this economic time. And I think it would be helpful for me to serve better as a councilman to have a better understanding of why. What is it? Is it real estate? Is it industrial goods? What is it? What's causing this? As policymakers, give us a better idea of the direction we need to be thinking in regards to our own city. And so I appreciate all you guys are doing and the efforts of the other department heads, because every department is operating like a mini business. And I indicated to Betsy Fretwell that this Performance Plus thing that has been initiated is turning out to running a business. And we've got the best and brightest minds that I'm aware of, so we should be on the top of the list and setting an example, Your Honor, for the rest of the state.
If I could...
Councilman Brown?
Go ahead, Mark.
Vincent?
I just wanted to add a little bit. I think both Councilman Ross and Councilman Wolfson, it's a few years ago this council talked about, and I don't know what terms we used, but a point in time that the dialogue should start today about creating a new public employee. Most importantly, protecting those that are in the system now. The toughest thing, at least I've learned the toughest thing, is when you start talking about takeaways for negotiated contracts that we have supported and voted on. And I don't think we win in that scenario. In fact, we lose when we try to take something away. But if there's an indicator, what's happened here with the retirement system and a change in state law, the impact it has on current employees and accelerating a decision to retire this summer, those things can happen. It's outside our control, or certainly outside our purview. But maybe it's time to start talking about, absolutely, with the unions, at least at the city level, to talk about what we can do for a future of 10, 15, 20 years down the road to, again, protect those that are in the system, no harm to them, but start looking at ways that we can better pass the baton on to the next generation of elected officials. Because I think that's our difficult challenge is we serve a certain time period, and most of our activity and efforts are today. We're looking at ways to operate the city and provide services and manage the budget, and we don't have the time too often to look 10, 15, 20 years down the road. It's the easy thing to do is just to ignore that and say someone else has to. And it's not just the public sector, just the last decade of even the private sector, some of those large American industries that have been impacted as far as their pensions and their retirement funds. So it's not exclusive to city government, but it's something that we should perhaps start the dialogue now. And without harming or hurting or violating any kind of negotiated agreement we're in, working with our representative units, and I think they're reflective to the appointive, because most of the activity on the appointive side mirrors that negotiated benefit or salary with our collective bargaining units. So it's the ability to start talking about creating the next generation public employee. As difficult as that sounds, we should perhaps at least consider initiating that discussion.
Mr. Mayor?
Yes,
I thought that in one of our city council meetings, I had asked that question about talking with the unions and perhaps looking at, we might have to provide different benefits for new members of coming into the city. Is that being looked into already?
Again, Councilwoman, that would be subject to collective bargaining. And yes, I think that is probably the realistic approach to this, is to not harm anybody that's already in the system, but to look at our new hires under maybe a different program of compensation and benefits. I don't know how successful we'll be at the bargaining table with that kind of an approach, but I think that's a fair and reasonable approach to take.
Right. Thank you.
And not to take away, I think some of the things that management and appointive and collective bargaining units at the city, we've done some things, longevity, some other negotiated benefits that have certainly helped the city from an operational standpoint. So I don't mean to say we haven't done anything, but the choice being, we hit this snapshot in time, and for the first time in everybody's recollection, we had to lay off a significant amount of employees. What I'd suggest is if we start the dialogue, that if we have a downturn in 10 years or 15 years, that it's not mandatory that we're going to have to lay off people, that we better position ourselves so the council still has discretion and the union still has the protections that everybody wants down the road. But the worst thing, and Doug, you've brought it up in some of your reports on what's happening in other cities across the country, if they ignore this issue and just hope that the next group of electeds handle it, that's when there's no discretion. They declare bankruptcy or lay off 100 employees. That I think, I can speak for the council, we don't want to be in that position where someone's mandating that we have to start laying off scores of employees.
We certainly don't want future councils to be punished that way as a result of our inaction. I think that's our responsibility, is as we sit here today, to make sure that the future is sustainable.
The other player in this, I might just add, and we're keenly, on the management side, we're keenly aware, I know you are too, but some of the most significant long-term liabilities that we're facing have to do with post-employment issues. It's either PERS, or it's post-employment health, or it could even be workers' comp related. Those liabilities are humongous. I mean, they frighten me, and I'll be retired by the time some of those big bills start showing up. And we have been doing actuary studies in these. The state does its own actuary studies at some point in time, and I think it's already begun, that the state needs to start looking at, with our help and the help of the labor groups, start looking at what those statutory liabilities are going to do to the system 20 years down the road, because it's significant. There's just no doubt about it.
And what you're saying, Mr. Mayor, what you're saying basically is that both sides, employer and employees, are aware of the problem. We have to work together to do something about it now to keep it so it isn't worse in the future.
That's exactly.
I just try to make sure I understand correctly.
You know, the world has changed.
Yes.
When you really get down to it. There was a time that I guess you retired when you were 62, and you died when you were 72. Now you retire when you're 55, and you move to Montana, and you don't die until you're 95. And we're sending the money so people could have a pretty good lifestyle. So I think we have to realize those things. We've got to be pragmatists. That's very, very important. When I first was elected, I went to people a lot smarter than myself who were the managers of government, and I said, what's government supposed to do? Because I didn't know what government was supposed to do. And they said, you provide benefits to your constituents, and you're not trying to make a profit from it. You're trying to create a public good, and that's your function. Well, I think that's changed now in view of the economy. We have to be malleable. We have to roll with the punches. Now we're going to Performance Plus, and we're running ourselves like a business because we have no choice. We're just not in cement, and we have to be able to adjust. And I think that's one of the great things that's coming out of this discussion, not only today, but on our prior workshops. I think that the council knows that our responsibility is to be able to adjust with the times and make sure that the future is protected. It's that simple.
Mayor Goodman, if I may, you said we're in a different world now, and it reminded me of, I think it was you, Betsy, that said times are different in that 10 or 20 years ago we needed to do certain things to attract employees, attract people to come and work. Was that John Restrepo that said that? We needed to do things to attract people to come to work for the city of Las Vegas. We don't have to do that so much anymore. People are knocking down our door wanting to work for the city of Las Vegas, so we're in a different world now where perhaps for our future generations and our future employees, we don't have to offer the same type of package. Once again, I think we're all in the same boat. We don't want to interrupt anybody's current expectations. We're talking about future expectations.
Okay. Moving on, as I try to wrap this up, this $32 million in transfers, if we didn't isolate those monies and if we didn't use them in fiscal year 10 like we're forecasting we'll have to, this is what we would look like. This, Councilman Wilson, you were asking before, this is that magic line that says if you divide our ending fund balance into our revenues, you will get a percentage, 10%, 12%. And arbitrarily, if we look at 10%, which was our prior budget policy, that's just 5.2 weeks, and I just realized I didn't change that bar. That should be up here. But the point being, that should be right about there. The point being that 5.2 weeks, which is 10% of 52, is barely a month and a half. And as I mentioned before in our workshop, that many of our revenue streams people don't pay us on time, don't pay us right away. The state may take a month or month and a half to disperse our share of the C-tax to us, and property tax is only distributed to us on a quarterly basis. So we need to have some reserves. And our budget policy today is 12%, which would actually be right about here. Without that reserve, we're in a situation where it's just going to deteriorate to the point where in 12 and 13, somewhere in here, we'd be forced to have mandatory layoffs. That's what we'd be looking at. With that $30 million, this is what that looks like. So there's a significant difference. We're still worried about this forecast, but again, it's just a forecast. We have it in front of us. We'll be watching and monitoring it. We'll continue to look at our revenues and our costs and do all the things that we're doing today. I don't think we can let up, but that's the impact that makes. I talked about the capital plan.
Mark?
Yes, sir.
Statutorily, is there a fund balance that is required of local government?
No. The only thing statutorily that addresses fund balance has to do with the protection of at least 8% of your fund balance is protected in collective bargaining. That's the only statutory. Obviously, you can't really have negative fund balance. So that illustration would never have happened. With respect to our 5-year capital plan, you saw the slide at the workshop. There's a little bit of change in this. Two major items. It's $1.7 million. That's up about $200,000 from our workshop. And there's two things that are driving that. One is in our final budget with the RDA, we're contemplating issuing now $130 million of RDA bonds, which you'll see here in a second. Those revenues are going partly for a refunding of existing debt, partly for the remaining Phase 2 and 3 of the UP infrastructure, and then partly for the postmodern museum and the Stewart Street improvements. That $50 million, excuse me, for the postmodern Stewart Street wasn't in the plan that we looked at back in March. And the other part of it was the part that I already mentioned, and that is the capitalization of the lease purchase of the City Hall. That $150 million is now worked into this plan, so that $200 million is that increase. But again, when we talk about the impact, this is what's in our plan, and these facilities, particularly things like rec centers and parks and city facilities and fire stations in particular, they all carry with them heavy operations and maintenance and utility costs, and that's what we have to now forecast into our future, and we've already talked about that. Let me talk a little bit about some good news. Our redevelopment budget, we anticipate having almost $25 million in tax increment revenues. That's a significant number. If you go back 5 years, 5 years ago, a redevelopment tax increment was just a little over $9 million. In 5 years, we've more than doubled it, almost tripled it, and in fact, the average annual percentage rate of growth over the last 5 years in redevelopment has been 22.4%. That's a very positive thing for us, and we wouldn't be getting that tax increment if it wasn't for the efforts of the city to execute projects and programs in the redevelopment. This didn't happen on its own. It happened because of your direction and the work that Office of Business Development does. With some available fund balance, we have covered all of these expenditures. This item here, this debt service, this contemplates the new debt service on $130 million worth of debt, and it also contemplates the last year of debt service on some old 15-year debt. That's about $3.7 million. So in 2010, this debt service number would be $3.7 million less than it's appearing here. On the project side, we have some carryover funding on some of our projects, and there's the $130 million in bond proceeds, and as we talked before, this is where that $130 million is going. Finally, in wrapping up, we did have a Citizens Advisory Council meeting last week. They did approve our budget policies. We did not change our budget policies. No changes to them, and I have a copy of that we'll give to the clerk and ask the mayor to sign. And also, in terms of just some office keeping, just wanted you to report to you that our tentative budget was accepted by the Department of Taxation, and so we'll be filing the final budget on June 1st. So unless you have any other questions.
Mayor?
Yes, Councilman?
Yes, I have a question for you, and possibly Mr. Scott Adams may want to come forward also, Director of Office of Business Development. During my trip to Kansas City this week, I had an opportunity to meet with Mayor Joe Bearden, who asked me to let you know that he says hello, and also had an opportunity to speak with their redevelopment agency, and something they mentioned slightly concerned me as it relates to what they're facing in Kansas. And they have great success in their downtown, just as we are having here. And they've used the tax increment financing to assist a lot of the projects in their downtown area. But something that they're running across is being able to retrieve those monies to put back into the system, being that they've used a lot of the tax increment financing. And I wonder if that's something that we've considered, Mr. Vincent or Mr. Adams, as it relates to future projects, and everyone, taking advantage of those TIF rebates and not being able to capture those dollars back from a projected period of time. And also, they mentioned that they used another form of bonding, which is a star bond, which I ran that information past Mr. Adams, and seeing how, in fact, one plays off of the other, and multiple or a variety of sources that we can actually capture those funds back into our system too, so that we can continue to keep up with the expanded growth that we face today. So if you can speak on that, I would.
In terms of, I'm not quite understanding the first part of that, in terms of it being able to recapture revenues in TIF. There's usually one concern you have in tax increment financing, especially if you bonded it, and that is, especially as we go through drops in property values, would you ever get to a point where your property values drop below a level that you need to make your debt repayment on bonds? And one of the safeguards we've had built into our system in Nevada is there's a circuit breaker built into the valuation where you can't exceed more than 8% commercial valuation in any given year, and we've dramatically gone way beyond that. So we believe that there's a cushion already built into the system that would ever prevent us. We've actually looked at that from dropping below what we need to make our debt repayment.
I'm not sure that was your question.
No, I'm not sure it was either.
But I think we'll do this, though, with the councilman's permission. We do have a redevelopment agency item with the budget on that, and maybe we could address those issues at that time.
That's fine.
Is that all right?
That's fine. But I just want to make sure that you understand my question as far as being able to, once the TIF expires, being able to capture our monies back after that set period of time. If, in fact, at January, we have 4 or 5 different developments taking advantage of the TIF, and at that future date when it expires, with development still coming online, not having enough in the pipeline to address that. So we can address it at the later date. I mean, at the later time.
Mayor, if you will, I was out of the room when you opened the meeting. I should have told you, I should have instructed Victor, you should have opened both those items together, so why don't you open it now?
Okay, fine. I didn't realize that was what you wanted to do. At this time, I'll call item number 6, which is a public hearing and possible action regarding fiscal year 2009 City of Las Vegas Redevelopment Agency tentative budget and fiscal year 2009 City of Las Vegas Redevelopment Agency final budget. It's a public hearing as well, which is now declared open. Now, I guess, now under that circumstance, why don't you answer the councilman's question?
I'll answer the question I think you asked, and if I didn't, I know you will correct me and straighten me out. The issue for us is the RDA has a sunset, and so to the extent that we can negotiate tax increment rebates or financing for developments, we can only negotiate that to the end of the sunset. The closer we get to the sunset, the less valuable those rebate or those tax increment financings are to the projects. That's issue number one. When RDA does sunset, some of the tax increment agreements we have today actually do expire before RDA sunsets. And when those expire, all that tax increment will continue to come back into the redevelopment authority for that remaining lifespan of the RDA. I think the RDA expires in March 15th of 2031 or something like that.
32, I believe.
Yeah, it's 32.
It's at 32?
Yeah, go ahead.
So I don't know if that was what you're once the RDA sunsets in its entirety, all of those tax revenues then will get distributed back to all the overlapping agencies, of which the City of Las Vegas is one,
Correct.
as is the school district and the state and the county. They'll all benefit tremendously. There'll be sort of a windfall, if you will, from when the RDA sunsets, the revenues that will come into all those agencies from the fruits of our labor.
Some cities, and another answer too is, and I'm not sure how Kansas City works, I know Chicago's this way, they do what's called project-based TIF.
Yes.
They don't have an entire redevelopment area, and you capture all the new taxes in that redevelopment area and are free to reinvest them back into the redevelopment area the way you choose. They set a TIF district for a specific project that has a finite life. When that finite life is over, it goes away.
Correct.
That doesn't happen here. We do individual rebates on individual projects, but once those terms are done, those dollars come back into the RDA as long as the RDA is still in effect.
Okay, and I guess what was taking place in Kansas, and I thank you for that correction, because they were not in a position to recapture those dollars back into their system. And so that's what I wanted to clarify, whether or not we were able to, because that was a major concern of theirs. So that raised my eyebrow to basically ask you the question if, in fact, that's what we were under, but you're explaining to me.
No, we're an area-wide redevelopment area and redevelopment program, so everything that happens inside that redevelopment area we receive through the end of the sunset. Now, the issues, the end of the sunset, as we approach that sunset, we start to have limited ability to issue bonds. We can only issue a bond through the sunset.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. Thank you, Mayor.
Very good. All right. Did you want to make a presentation as far as the RDA is concerned?
March 10th.
I didn't invite them, Mayor.
But
I should
I've
have.
called them both, and then we're going to have public comment.
Well, the last slide that I was talking about, actually, and again, I apologize, if I would have thought of it, I would have written a note for you to open both, but this is the redevelopment budget here. And this budget, the operations budget includes the transfer of the economic development resources into the RDA. That was one of the changes we talked about to get some relief from the general fund. The housing set-aside is a statutory 18% of our tax increment revenues. This new debt service, this includes the contemplated new debt service for the $130 million of RDA debt. And then this slide here just shows this is where the $130 million of new debt is being spent on, and there are some existing projects that we currently have that need to be closed out. We still have the Fifth Street School project. I know we've got a land assemblage project, and there's another project that I...
Downtown Visitors Center.
The Visitors Center.
Information
Thank you
Center.
very much. Right.
And I know this question was asked during our workshops. I don't recall the answer. Has the housing set-aside funds been expended?
No, they have not been.
What are we doing with that money?
I know that we're looking at a couple of projects. I know one of the projects, for example, we're looking at maybe partnering with, is my understanding, was the Alpha Omega project at Decatur and Vegas Drive is a possibility. I'd have to ask Neighborhood Services if there's any other specific
I don't know,
projects.
statutorily, are we given any kind of a mandate as to how we spend the 18%?
Not statutory, other than it has to be spent on a project sort of affordable housing as opposed to market rate.
Right. What are we doing, Mr. Harson?
Right. To confirm what Mark is saying, Steve Harson, Director of Neighborhood Services, the money does need to be spent for affordable housing, anything 18% AMI or below. We are working in as far as different programs. Some of it may be going with the Community Land Trust, which we're finalizing the 501c3 status. We're also looking at doing buyer assistance, mortgage buy-down. We're getting all these programs finalized, and actually I'll be giving a report, hopefully within the next month or two, to give you an idea of exactly where all those RDA funds are going. But all it stipulates is it does go towards affordable housing.
Right, so we have $4.5 million, basically, and we could use that money for a lot of good causes. I think we really have to
and especially
decide
with
what those good
foreclosure.
causes are.
Especially with the foreclosure issue facing us as well.
And we can bond against affordable housing as well, again, given the constraints of the RDA
Well, we might want to consider buying some of these homes that are up for foreclosure with that money and make it for affordable housing for those who fit within the economic guidelines.
And that is part of the plan that we're looking at.
All right, that's important. Okay, did you want to
make a further presentation, Mr. Adams? Nope?
No.
So that
March
winds
10th.
up the presentation on both items. All right, this is the time for public comment. Would anybody like to be heard?
Yeah.
Excuse me? This is the public hearing now, and then we'll call citizens' participation afterwards.
Okay. Tom McGowan, Las Vegas citizen, Las Vegas resident. Very interesting day. I'll be brief. I could probably shorten this whole thing for you. About 40 years ago, a very learned professor by the name of L. Deming Edwards came around, and he was an expert on systems development, ways to do things that worked. He had an item that he called TQM, Total Quality Management, and it worked fine. The only problem with it was it stopped at the management level. But you got much more than the management level. You got a lot of brilliance out here at every level. Really brilliant people. If they have an opportunity to use that brilliance in the public interest, there's no end to what they can do, what you can do. They don't set public policy, you do. So you need to recognize what you've got. Also understand the ideal procedure would be total quality, not total quality management. Total quality. Everybody is an expert. Everybody has expertise in their own way, except a couple of people maybe. I say they're kidding me. Everybody does, no question about it. Even you do. And you may not be at the top of the list, but you do have talent, surprisingly. The secret is not complex. What you've been doing here today is taking something very simple, becoming mystified by it, because humans are like that. We're like intrigued. We don't like something that's so simple that just runs up top of the head. No way. We're like intrigued. And so we forget something very simple. You were born with the instinctive and inherent capability to do everything that a human can do best. And what you forgot is it's already there in the outline. Somebody once said the way to pour water out of a Polish boot is the instructions are written on the heel, so you can't miss. The thing about this entire procedural configuration is all there for you to find in the Ten Commandments and the Constitution of the United States, particularly the amendments. It's all there. All you have to do is follow that. If you do that and it works, you'll work. Everything you're doing will work. If you don't, you can manipulate all you want and it will not work. You guys come back down, the bottom line on this, and the last statement I'll make. The ideal configuration of a physical body is not a block diagram, not square, not rectangular. It is spherical. You can tell that when you look up at the sun or the moon in a celestial ball. They're not flat, not even round. They're spherical. Because that is the ideal way for the configuration at its best to be effective and efficient. Now, if you take spherical geometry and apply it to this government or this world, which has changed, the world changed because it got a little too confusing for its own good. It's trying to find different ways to do things with shortcuts. They don't work. The shortest way between 2 points is a straight line. So you stick to the straight and narrow and you get there. If you don't want to try it some other way, go ahead. Take your time. Take all the time you need. But you're going to cause a lot of money, a lot of time, a lot of people are hurt in the meantime. Get back to square one. Very simple. You can do it. If I didn't think you could, I wouldn't be here to tell you that. So I'm going to submit my comment, which had nothing to do with what I just told you. Okay. Let's congratulate you for a hell of a ride. Very good parade.
That it was. Okay, thank you. Would anyone else like to be heard at this time? Seeing none, we'll close the public hearing. May I have a motion, please, on item number 5?
Yes, Your Honor. I move to follow staff's recommendation for adoption of the fiscal year budget of 2009, including the 5-year capital improvement plan as amended by the guidelines from the council.
Thank you. Let's vote on that, please. Opposed? Motion carries. And item number 6, please.
I'll make the same motion, Your Honor.
Let's vote on that, please. Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. This is item number 7, citizens' participation. Public comment during this portion of the agenda must be limited to matters within the jurisdiction of the City Council and Redevelopment Agency. No subject may be acted upon by the City Council and Redevelopment Agency unless that subject is on the agenda and is scheduled for action. If you wish to come forward, please step up here. Be happy to hear from you.
Don't get up. Tom McGowan, Las Vegas resident. I'm proud of you. I shouldn't be, but I am. All of you. You are you're coming up with things that nobody thought you had, really. And some of you are ready to be elevated to a higher level. I'm not sure it's a higher level, but somebody said we need a governor someday. Am I getting ideas? I happen to be a candidate for election to the Clark County Commission, unanimously acclaimed by the Independent American Party. I'm not a party politics person. As I said previously, I would never join an organization that would accept me as a member. But I'll go for the American Party because I'm an American, and I'm probably as independent as most Americans. And so I'll be over at the Clark County Commission. I intend to win that race. And I do whatever I can to help you get some of your things done. And maybe cut you off in the past if you're doing something that I think is wrong. And one other thing I want to do, as a county commissioner, I'll make this a solemn vow. I intend to determine who it was that caused the untimely death of a homicidal death of one of our finest and friendliest citizens in Las Vegas. His name is Buffalo Jim Barrier. 4 daughters here, very, very courageous, carrying on in a pretty rough neighborhood. But they're not alone. I'll be around, and so will you. And the perpetrators will be brought to justice. That's a solemn vow. A lot of other things will be done as well. The Doctors of Side Clinic, for example. People think they can get away with murder here. And maybe sometimes they think they can. They get a little bit off the edge there. But sooner or later they come up against somebody that stops them cold. And I have enough breath left to, after waiting all this time today to say a couple of things, I thank you for the opportunity to say these things. Once again, onward and upward. You're all great. Now, do it. Thank you.
Would anybody else like to be heard during citizens' participation? All right, seeing none, the Special Joint City Council and Redevelopment Agency meeting is adjourned.